Hello, everyone. Trent,
G'day, Wazza.
how are you, my friend?
Mate, always good, brother. Always good. Always good. Good to be here, mate. Good to share a bit of wisdom with whoever's on board tonight, mate.
Absolutely. Been looking forward to this one today.
Mate, always looking forward to it. It's always nice to have a yarn with yourself, mate, and to hopefully we can wake a few crew up along the way today, mate.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting topic, a great idea that you came up with, and nice to have you on here as part of GWC team. And just in case everyone doesn't know, Trent has now officially joined the GWC team, and he and I work closely together and just awakening and helping everyone kind of understand what's happening in Australia. And really, I think that's what motivated it today, wasn't it?
Mate, absolutely, brother. I think we both know the solution to the challenge that Australia faces. Unfortunately, you can't do it by yourself. I can't do it by myself. It's very clear that we need to wake up. We need to take some responsibility and put the focus on the solutions, not the problems, mate. Mm.
Maybe we can start by just asking people to put in the chat where they're from, just to get a bit of an idea which part of Australia are you from, or even if you're from Australia, just so we can see where everyone's from. Numbers are building up fast here. Sydney,
Got a few in
busy.
here, mate.
Yeah, it's growing pretty fast. Let's have a look.
Everywhere,
Adelaide,
everywhere.
Melbourne, Albany, Margaret River, Oslo. Gosh, it's everywhere, isn't it? Victoria. We've got a wide range of Australians here. So maybe just in one word, I might just get everyone just to type in just how you're feeling in one word or just three words of Australia right now. Like what's brought you here today? Like what's the thing that your overall feeling and where things are at? Like, yeah, worried, someone's put. Because we're here today to bring hope and to help. I'm sure Trent would agree. We're here to kind of give a face of truth, but at the same time, just have a message of hope. So worried. What about anyone else? Very concerned for our choices. Yep. Curious for opportunities.
I like that, Grant. Need to do something.
Yep. I would agree with that. Going down the drain a bit. Yeah, it's certainly making some not very productive changes. Always hopeful, frustrated by the system, concerned but hopeful, unsure. Concerned but hopeful. I like that. I mean, it's a good way of describing it. Good, but still believing for the best, finding opportunities. Yep. So, well, what we've covered here, Trent, we wrote a whole lot of different things we're going to look at today. So we were going to look at basically, the private versus public, which path serves the greater good. So maybe let's just get started on that. Like private versus public, how do you see that, so to speak? Like what's your summary of that?
Oh, mate, my summary of that's pretty straightforward. I think that anybody, multiple reasons, anyone that does anything in the private, I think that they're not contributing to the country in any way, shape, or form. I think that they're running, they're hiding. I think they're very good at highlighting what the problems are in the country, but they don't want to be a part of the solution. They don't collectively want to work. I think that they do things very selfishly, personally, when you go into the private, Warren. I think it's all about you. It's not about us in any way, shape, or form. I think that you're an absolute goose for other reasons. You've got the biggest target on your head. It doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. It's nice in theory. I think a lot of people get their information, Warren, from people that don't actually live this path and they don't walk this path. And I think a lot of the advice that people get around the private space is probably coming from people outside of the country already that no longer have any of those concerns. Mate, for me, it's very, very, very clear. Like, I'll get people to put this in the chat box as well too, guys, if you don't mind. Just put similar to what Warren asked, what do you think the biggest concerns in Australia are? What are the biggest concerns that we have within Australia? I find that people are really, really good at identifying what the concerns are. But when you move into the public space, Warren, well, you be a part of that solution. You actually contribute to the greater good. I think we can all be aware that feel free to type things in, guys. Yeah.
100%.
Uh,
Agree,
Private
just disagree with us. It's good. We got no problem with you disagreeing.
Yeah, even like, government overreach. Yeah, I get that 100%, but I'll also ask the same question. Is anybody else in here looking to take over government? Is anybody starting to fill that role in any way, shape, or form? You know, it's easy to point the finger at what other people are doing, but if we don't take action ourselves, then who
Well,
really is at loss, you know? Where's it really
well,
sit?
I think like him or dislike him, I think we would all agree, whether we agree with what he's done or not, Trent, Trump choosing to go into the public arena, not the private, do you think it's overall at least shifted something in the world? Is
Oh,
that fair
mate,
to say?
absolutely. 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 It does bring some inspiration. It definitely does bring some hope. Absolutely. But, you know, I just find that a lot of the time, the problem, people find the government to be the problem. Well, one thing when you actually move into the public space, in particular with your public foundations and the rest of it, well, all of a sudden they can be your best friend. You can acquire grants, you can deliver things that you believe that Australia needs to. You can work with them. I think as well that people are too quick to point the finger at the government. I'm not saying the government's great by any means, in any way, shape, or
No,
form,
no.
at all, in any way. But I also, you know, I'm aware that many people benefit from things like NDIS. Many people use things like Medicare. Many people were happy to take money, you know, during the COVID break and all the rest of it. So I just don't think it's a thing where you can pick and choose when the government's the enemy or not. And in summary, really, Warren, coming back to the private and the public, I'd I would never go anywhere near the private. It doesn't suit any of us. At the end of the day, we're all sons and daughters of God, right? We're all here to make the place better. We're all here to leave an impact, and we've all got to play our role to it. If everybody stood up and took a little bit more responsibility in the public space, then the need for the government would be very minimal, even to the point, Warren, where they might not even be needed as well, too, right?
Well,
But until we stand up to that and we take responsibility for it, we're going to be asking other people to do that for us.
yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, this is something that we were talking about last night, wasn't it, Trent? Just about, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the reasons that Australia has gotten to the state where we've got to compared to, say, America is America, at least they push back a little bit. Like when the government comes out and says, we're going to restrict your rules on guns, America says, oh, no, you're not. Number one, they do have some constitutional protection, but what do people do? They go and they're buying more guns, number one. Number two, during COVID, I think the statistics showed 51% of people only got vaccinated across the whole of America. Now, obviously,
Mhm.
most of it was in California and New York, I think it's fair to say. But again, why was that? Because people did push back um, against things, so to speak. And look, I hate government overreach too. I mean, as you know, I think the government of Australia, and I said this last night, I think Australia is in a world of challenges right now. I think what we're seeing right now is unfortunately stuff that I never really hoped I'd see in my lifetime. I honestly didn't, where we would see the level of dystopia and government control. But at the same time, why has it happened? It's happened because I think most of us, all of myself included, it's to some extent, it's kind of like, look, you know, let's just run from it, or let's just go and hide in the mountains, or let's just go and set up a private foundation. And there's a very good book in the Bhagavad Gita, which was a really good spiritual book. There, I think there's a very pertinent chapter in that one on the public versus private, where King Arjuna was facing a religious war in India that was pretty bad, and the country was in serious trouble of a dictatorial government taking over. And he basically just said pretty much, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course. Um, he said was, look, he said to Krishna, not knowing that he was his chariot rider, who he really was, he said, look, dude, I'm kind of not up for this. You know, this is not what I signed up for. I'm just going to go into the private. I'm going to go and become a monk in the mountains. I'm just going to meditate and kind of lead the country to the dogs. You know, I mean, fuck this. You know, it's all too hard, and I'm going to get back to God. And what Krishna says in chapter 2 is quite profound. He says, "You speak sincerely, but you speak from ignorance." Very powerful words. You speak sincerely, but you speak from ignorance. He
Mhm.
says the job of the job of the spiritual man or woman is to be a warrior. In other words, to push back and say, "Well, no," because he says if you don't do this, how will your future generation remember you? How does our future generation remember us during COVID? Really, I remember what I said to my kids at the time when they were saying, "What do we do when the lockdowns were at their worst?" And I said this to them, April 2021, 27th of April. I remember the day clearly. I said, in 3 years' time, we're going to be looking back on ourselves and we want to ask ourselves, how do we want to remember ourselves? Do we want to be the cowards who sit in a cafe and say nothing, or do we want to be the people who at least do something about it and get out into the public arena? That was why I chose to speak out and run Global Wealth Club webinars and teach about lawful rights, even though the easiest thing for me to do would have been to shut my mouth and just kind of sort myself out, which I did. I found a way legally to not have to wear masks. I found a way legally not have to be vaccinated, and I got on with life. But I also thought to myself, I have a civic duty to help those who can't help themselves, or those who are vulnerable, those who need a voice. And that was one of the reasons I chose to speak out. So one of the reasons that I don't like about the private, look, I've got no, to me, private, I don't have any problems if it's coming from the right space. Like what color underwear I'm wearing right now is no one's business. And that's not because I'm hiding anything. I just don't think you really want to know, Trent. I'm sure you don't. So to me, privacy is just protecting our right to we tell who we want to tell. But as soon as we have that running and hiding syndrome, it just kind of breaks down. That's when we seem to get into trouble. What do you reckon?
Well, I think you sort of made 100%. I think you just got to be mindful as well that, you got to, we've all got to look at our own personal development again too, and we've got to look at, it's great to have a high character, but we've also got to be very consciously awake, and we've got to be quite, in tune with our spirit as well too. Because sometimes when we have a high character and we sort of fight against some of these spaces, well, people become a part of the problem and not so much a part of the solution as well too. So it's important to have that balance, mate, like somebody like yourself that's very high conscious, during COVID, and mate, there's polarity to everything right? Like, was COVID really that bad? Well, I'm not saying it was great in any way, shape, or form, but I tell you what, it woke up half of this country, which was bloody needed for a long time as well, too, right? It's definitely helped people, elevate their consciousness. It's made people think differently as well. It's made people seek alternate solutions. People are looking for other ways to do things. So there's polarity to everything, as you know, was. There's the, it depends which way that you look. If you're looking this way or you're looking this way as well, too, right? I think that COVID really deep down has been an incredible thing for the country to wake up,
Oh,
for people to see what really goes on. But the thing is now that people have woken up, well, you don't wake up and then run away. You got to wake up and then you got to step up then I think we could all list probably 50 things that could be better within this country. The government's not going to do it, mate. It's obvious, like it's pretty clear. We've got to give up on that sense. So I think it's important that people can identify, what they're good at, where they can contribute, how they might be able to make a difference. And if we have these little communities everywhere all making a difference, you look at all the people that you got a couple of hundred on here tonight you look at all the people that are on here tonight, mate, all parts of Australia. If we all play a little bit of a role, mate, we can make a big difference very, very, very quickly. But if we're in fear, if people are in fear and people are hiding and people are running, well, it's really feeding the beast is really what it's doing, because it's keeping that low vibration around. So, mate, I think it's a matter of a lot of things of perspective. We've also got to be aware that, yeah, things are tough at the moment, but, I can have this conversation quite openly with you, Warren, but, you look through history, you can go back many, many hundreds of centuries, thousands of centuries, but things always change as well, too. We're in the age of Aquarius now. We're into the truth. We're into the technology as well, too. So there's a lot of other things which are all happening at once also, too, mate. And change is inevitable. And sometimes I think people can get too comfortable and they resist the change a little bit instead of evolving with the change and growing with the change, and being a part of that change as well.
Well, it comes down, doesn't it, to the whole thing, you get what you focus on. And it's very interesting how the government has specifically targeted people who are sovereign citizens, in other words, about breaking away from the government. And I noticed this with the firearms. I mean, many would have seen that stuff, which I shook my head in. But again, when I did look a little bit further, I mean, that was one thing I noticed during COVID, Trent, that the people who got heavily targeted were the ones who got up and pretty much declared open war on the government and said, we won't submit to the mandates. People who just go, well, we're just not going to do it, by and large got left alone. And I noticed this with the sovereign citizen movement. A lot of people who got their guns confiscated, which, by the way, is outrageous. I mean, to take them off lawful firearms owners is outrageous. But at the same time, basically, many of them are getting up and saying we're common law sheriffs and we refuse to submit to the government, which is kind of in a way saying we're declaring war upon you. So I think a lot of it, to deal with a society like this, is going to require a lot of wisdom. And that's why I like this. I mean, I mentioned in one of the first emails that in the book of Hosea in the Bible, it says, but my people perish for lack of money, or sorry, lack of knowledge. In other words, from ignorance. We perish because we just don't know our rights. We don't know our laws. We don't know the truth. We don't know our heritage. We don't know our history, And the fact is, we didn't get our rights by sitting back and hiding away. People got their rights in society because they knew how to protect themselves and hide where they needed to, but they also knew to speak out and do what was courageous and do what was right. And the fact is, we wouldn't have seen the breaking down of the woke system in America if you hadn't had people speak out like they did, if you hadn't had Trump speak out. Charlie Kirk spoke out, cost him his life, and it's a sobering thought, but it reminds you what Thomas Jefferson said. He said that when you leave things to a point where you don't push back for too long, eventually you get to the point where to keep your rights will come at the fear of life or loss of life or great cost, which in a way is kind of where we're at now. And I think Australia needs change. Our medical system needs change. That's why I've seen, I've got a friend of mine who in Bali, Tyler Tom, some of you who some may have heard of him. He's a really good health influencer, very, very wise guy. And I was seeing him over in Bali, and he loves Australia. And he said the same thing. He goes, half of what I do, I can't even do in Australia. I've got the TGA after me, whereas here in Bali, I can do it freely. In Bali, I was there at a wellness center, and which I go to, and it's amazing. The treatments they do are like world-class, really low cost. Half the treatments they do are not allowed in Australia. And I think we need people in the homeopathy space and in the energy medicine space. We need people in all walks of life saying, well, hang on a sec, we want to see change in this kind of area.
Oh, mate, absolutely. In education, I mean, anyone that's been to school in Australia, doesn't matter when you were there, whether it was 50 years ago or 5 years ago, you're taught how to write a resume, not a business plan. You're told that you got to pay taxes, but you don't understand why you're paying taxes or how to do your own taxes as well too. I mean, schools are no different to prisons, mate. You get told when to eat, what to eat. You got to line up in two. You get told what to wear. These days as well, mate, they're all surrounded by fences. You can't even access the schools for play and stuff where you once could, right? So there's many areas, mate. There's at the end of the day, we need we need a revival is really what we need was, there's all different areas, there's all bits and pieces to do that. And that only happens when the power comes back to the people and the people stand up. And I think as well, sometimes, Warren, some of the biggest challenges are that, you know, I think some of the biggest challenges are that a lot of time people aren't really living to their true purpose, what their real gift is. And I think sometimes there's a fear of their authentic self as well too, mate. I think there's a little bit of a fear or a lack of self-worth at times as well, that we can compare ourselves to what other people do very easily, and we think that we can't do that. But at the end of the day, mate, the sun shines on all of us the same. We've all came here the same way. We're all going the same way. We've all got the same opportunities, right? It's mate, it's definitely a time for a revival, but I think it's only going to happen through the people, mate. And you know how strongly I feel around about public foundations, about making a difference and being that change, because it all starts with the man in the mirror, right? And I definitely notice that some people see more chaos than others, and it's as within, so without, right? If there's chaos in your own mind, then you're going to see chaos out there. If you can get order in your own mind, then you're going to find that there's order out there, or there's opportunities out there as well too, right? So it's sometimes, yeah, we can point the finger to what everything else needs to happen, but we do always have to start with the man in the mirror.
Well, John DiMartini recently, he wrote a blog which was very timely a few days ago. And he said, what we see in the external world outside of us is feedback for us as to the conflicts within our inner world, which makes me question a lot. And that's all the great teachers like Claire Graves and Human Consciousness, Ken Wilber in his Religion of Tomorrow says the same thing. And so the question I would ask you is, what does that tell us about the chaos and the conflict going on inside of us as an Aussie, Trent?
Yeah, yeah, well, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
Yeah, so what do you mean? Like, I remember one of the things you said to me, like, as we talked, this is one of your ideas, East versus West, two worlds are colliding. So tell me what particularly about that, and what you mean about that, and about the Great Reset and the Great Awakening, because that was something that you and I have spoken a lot. Maybe explain it to everyone.
Yeah, well, mate, when we threw around the East versus West, mate, I don't think you're any further west than you could be in this country. I literally live on the most furthest easterly point of Australia. So, we do see different parts of the world. It's a little bit more chaotic over this side than it is over your side, mate, but there's still the same challenges that we face. But for me, mate, it's been very clear for, 10, 12 years ago, I knew this was coming. And it's a matter of It really comes down to consciousness, Warren. You know, the Great Reset will only apply to those that fail to raise their consciousness, that fail to move spiritually, fail to actually absorb who they really are, their true self, who they are. They need to break away from greed. They need to break away from guilt and shame. They need to get away from lust, is another real big one. Fear is an exceptional one. For those that can't break away from those emotions and get stuck with those attachments, then I believe that they will be a part of the Great Reset because they haven't been proactive enough within themselves. So they're going to be dependent on it. The Great Awakening is the opposite side. Those that understand emotions are just things that we feel. They are not who we are. If you're angry for a reason and there's a reason why you're angry, identify what that reason is and remove that situation. Change your environment, change the way that you speak about yourself, change your perception on things. Learn that emotions are teachers, work through those emotions and start to live in your higher vibrations, higher emotions, gratitude, love, acceptance, oneness, start to live in and start to embody that as well. So for me was, I don't know if you've got a slide there, mate, but the Hawkins model of consciousness is always a good one to use as a bit of an example for people to understand this. Because what
Yeah.
happens when we're low vibrations, mate, is we just fall into the victim mindset. And the victim mindset is quite simply 1 minute you're the victim, the next minute you're blaming someone, or the next minute you're rescuing someone. And it's just this little vicious little drama triangle that we can just belt around in. Very low consciousness, and we don't have a very big perspective on life. And it's pretty brutal, mate. Look, I've lived there. For those that aren't aware, but I spent a big part of my life in mental health work, and I've delivered mental health programs, predominantly Australia and New Zealand. And it would always blow my mind, within that space when you'd start to look at, when people would have challenges, it's like, well, what are your challenges? What are you feeling? All I'd have to do is ask questions like, instead of working out in your head, I'd start from the bottom. And it's like, well, are you moving your feet? Are you looking after your physical body? What are you putting into your tummy? How do you look after your emotional health? How do you speak of yourself? Like, what are you watching? Like, what do you listen to, right? So we've all got to be very aware and very conscious not to allow ourselves to fall into those environments. And then we need to try and pursue environments. I noticed one or two people earlier when you were asked some questions on here, Warren, had said to be around awake people. Like, I think that is fantastic, guys. Surround yourself around people that you aspire to be or on the vibration where you are. I'm very much, I'm aware of what's going through in the country in so many ways. But for myself, primarily for a good 4 or 5 years now, I've really focused on my own awakening. Over at IAM, I've got an incredible tribe of people, some smaller tribes which are a little bit more committed to the purpose, and then others that are new to the level and plenty in between. But for me, mate, when, COVID, even prior to COVID, it was just focusing on the Great Awakening. And for me, that's around about breaking away from those emotions because we can be prisoners to our own emotions, right? We can feed those emotions, and it really is hell on earth, because heaven and hell is just a mindset, right, Warren? It's all just a mindset. So if you're down the bottom in those red down there, then you're really living in hell. Turning up to a job that doesn't serve you every day, very shameful. You feel that when you've got a purpose and you can do more in your life, but you're not executing it, well, it can keep you in shame very easy. The way that we might treat other people at times, where we've got the opportunity where we can go and, rectify that. We can apologize, we can make amends, but instead we might become the bully and sort of drive guilt into being a bully. We get stuck. I think fear and ego, fear and lust are just massive ones, and ego, another massive one as well. So as you can see, you're down in that red. You don't really have a very big perspective of life in any way, shape, or form. You're not really conscious. When you start to understand these things, and it's all good to be angry. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm angry with the government 100%, but I'm not going to live in that emotion in any way, shape, or form. I've got better things to be doing than living that emotion, and I most certainly do not give my energy to something that doesn't deserve it. So it's about focusing on those higher vibrations. Many people have heard the term like living in the 5D or in the fifth D, and really that's just a high vibration is really what it is. So it's when you start to reach that blue up there, when you start to reach into that purple, it's heaven is a state of mind. Heaven literally is on earth. If you can find that and you can not attach yourself to those emotions. So in answer to your question, Warren, when I talk around about the Great Reset and the Great Awakening, well, anything from that yellow and below, people that are stuck in those emotions, I believe they're going to become a part of the Great Reset. And I believe that they'll probably be dependent. They probably will have universal incomes. They probably will be reliant on the government. For those that raise their consciousness now, put that focus, because again, this word sovereign gets thrown around so loosely, like so loosely. Sovereignty is in the soul. There's only one sovereign, and that is God, bottom line, right? And it's around about being free in your soul. So if you can be free in your own soul, so you don't torment yourself, you get out of your own way, you don't play the victim, you don't buy into any of that stuff, and you focus on what you can do, and you move up to the top of those blues and those purples. That's where the great awakening is. And those people that are in that space, those people that make those moves for it, well, they're doing things along the lines of, yeah, they are cleaning up their affairs. Absolutely. They are being honest with themselves with what they really want to do. They're not allowing any self-doubt to hold them back. They're giving it a go. They're probably surrounding themselves with other people that may have walked those paths before that they can lean on, they can get advice. They probably are starting to look at around about international, how they might be able to play internationally so they can move around. They're probably starting to set things up behind laptops as an example. So things that are online. They're probably looking at around about how I can generate income when I'm asleep. They're probably looking at how I can generate income in other countries and other jurisdictions when time zones change. They're probably, diving into crypto and things like that, new things that are emerging into the new world.
Mm.
So, mate, for me, it's pretty straightforward. The Great Awakening is those that raise their consciousness, and the Great Reset will be for those that don't. And I honestly don't see it any other way, was.
No, and look, what I like what you're saying, if you had to summarize this, is it's about raising your consciousness to a different way of thinking of it, because what you focus on is what you get more of, and what you tend to, and how you frame things with everything. I learned this with fixing my health, Trent. I mean, I remember years ago when I had severe pain in my fingers, and someone said, "Oh, you got arthritis." Now, I knew the moment, but I said, "I've got arthritis. I've got it." Now, it doesn't mean I sit around walking around saying, "I don't have arthritis." I don't, because that's actually focusing on it as well. So what
Correct,
I
brother.
said, so
Correct.
all I said was, I've got the symptoms of arthritis, but they're dissolving. That was how I framed it. I've got the symptoms of arthritis, but they're dissolving. In other
Yep.
words, I didn't deny it, so I'm going to require to take me some action, but it's dissolving. So I thought, what would be wise action for me to take to get my fingers back to normal, optimum, highest quality state? That was my question. And when I tuned in, I did some reading on Louise Hay and what she said about. I started with the metaphysics, and arthritis was a lot about self criticism, self love issues, and self hatred and perfectionism. And I thought, yep, that's me. So then I said, okay, what's my next step to dissolve that? And I kind of just let go. And the next day or two, I ended up bumping into a lady in my favorite cafe, and tells me she's a yoga teacher, and how a lot of people who get arthritic symptoms is because they've got a tight body. So I started doing yoga. And then the next thing that happened was I come across a Tyler Tolman article about using Kabbalah juice fasting. And so I just followed my instinct and did all this 18-day juice fast. I use it as a time to change my thoughts, and every day giving thanks, my fingers are getting better. The other thing I did, I noticed that my thoughts had become very negative and fearful around my hands. And when I would wake up in the middle of the night around 3 o'clock, the first thing I'd do was, in a panicked movement, I'd move my fingers, feel the pain, and I'd freak out and think, what if I have arthritis like my friend Joanne, who had
Mhm.
arthritis? That's the first thought that would come to me. So I thought, I'm going to train myself out of this habit. And I learned this from Pastor Joyce Meyer, interestingly. She reckoned that every morning when she'd wake up and fear would hit her, she would just wake up, and in her case, she would say, I'm an overcomer in Christ. Satan, you're under my feet. You have no power. That was her affirmation. And within 6 months, she broke her spirit of fear that drove her. So I just did this every day. I'd wake up, and when the thought would come into my mind about my hands, I would I'd imagine a red paint, throwing and hitting the thought, and then getting hit with an axe and smashing the thoughts. And then I'd imagine a whole new thought, and to see myself standing there. And that's all I would do. It took me about a month to break the habit, but I broke the habit. Six
Yep.
months later, my hands were absolutely perfect. I had no symptoms, and I was completely fine. And I've healed 5 incurable diseases. And so, for example, when you start not thinking in fear and start thinking about the Great Awakening, you go, okay, what other choices do we got? Maybe it's stepping out in Australia and going into the public. Maybe, like Tyler Tolman, you might go, you know what? I'm very attached to my way of life in Australia, but is this really what I want? I'm spending more time in Bali myself, not because I'm running away, but I thought I like the freedom in Bali. I like the fact I can spend $12 a day and just ride a motorbike and not have to go through a 6-month, 100-hour, thing or whatever you got to go through. I like the fact that by and large, when the police come and talk to me about a matter, they smile at me, shake my hand, and talk to me normally. I like that. And so I'm kind of looking at all levels, and opportunities start to come to you, as well as at the same time being, how can I be a voice in Australia, but from a place of power? So I think when you
Yeah.
go into the private, it can be about your motivations. Why? I mean, like, if you want to go to Cook Island, set up in complete privacy, kudos to you. But a lot of people's idea of private is to kind of run and hide, if that makes sense.
Man, I think you made a couple of good points just there, and I think one big thing that people do too much is they operate from their head, right? They don't operate from the heart. And I think a lot of the time with that fear, it really comes
Yeah.
within the head, they don't operate from the heart. And one good thing I think one of the greatest things that I could probably tell people in regards to getting out of those low vibrations, if anyone that's watching at the moment is stuck into that, is you need to really ask yourself, well, what is your purpose? What is it that you're here to do, right? Like, what do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? What will people pay for? If you can identify what your purpose is, you're going to find so much more joy than actually having a big bank balance by any means. But to ask that question, you've got to ask it in your heart, don't you, Woz? You've got to be really honest with yourself. You've really got to check in with yourself to see where it's at. I've always said that the devil lives in the head, mate, and God lives in the heart. And for me, I operate from the heart with everything which I do. I listen to myself. I listen to my body. My body will always tell me what's going on. I mean, everybody knows what it's like when you walk into a room and there's an uneasy energy. When I walk into a room like that, I turn around and walk straight out of it. It's not the type of environment for me to be around, but you've got to be in tune with that sort of stuff. I think when you talk around about Bali and that stuff too, man, I've known you for quite some time now, and that's nothing different. That's just the way that you live at the end of the day. It's not a matter of making a different move. That's just kind of who you are, because that's the life that you choose to live. Also, your work is online, so you can do that in other places, and kudos to you for doing that, mate. You made those changes. You learnt AI, you learnt systems, you got people around you poached me, you get your right people, and it makes things work for you, and you can live that lifestyle that you want to live. But the truth of the matter is you're being very authentic to yourself. And mate, let's be honest, mate, you're the best at what you do. There's no two questions about that. But why do I work with you? Because of your authenticity, mate, and because you actually care. I love your accolades. They're great. Don't get me wrong. But I can talk to you, mate, and it's always a heart-to-heart connection, just like even this conversation now, because you're true to yourself. And I think that, in my belief, I think majority of people, I think a high majority of people, and I was once in this same boat as well too, and I'm not saying this from an authority, perspective in any way, but real joy, real joy and real happiness is being free in the spirit. So it's in the mind as well too. It's not just in the body, right? So for us to really be free and for us to really feel that sovereign feeling, we've got to do what we're here to do, what we're aligned to do, what our gift is. Everybody's got a unique gift that nobody else has got. These are things that we can share, that we can deliver with people as well, mate. It's a yeah, I can never stress enough to people in times like this to get out of your head, get into your heart, listen to your heart, follow your heart, speak. This is why they call it spelling when we say words, we're casting spells. Don't say don't use the word like can't, things like that. They're all little mindsets. And the truth of the matter is, I think a lot of the time when people first wake up, they're quite angry, and they're angry with good reason too, was like it's fair. Because let's be honest, pretty much everything you've been told is the polar opposite, right? Like, let's be really honest. Anything that you're ever told is pretty much the polar bloody opposite. So there's a lot of that confusion. There's still the Babylonian system around it, but the matter is, okay, cool. Let's get some more wisdom. Let's focus on developing my consciousness. Let's get some more wisdom. Let's not hate ourselves for what we didn't know yesterday. Let's be grateful that we know it for today, and let's action things different tomorrow. I think a big thing, mate, as what individuals collectively need to do is they really need to rewire their subconscious, because the subconscious can be the biggest trap for us. And that's really what the Matrix has embedded, those first 5 years where you come into the world and you're in a theta brainwave where you basically just absorb everything in your environment. So it can be difficult for people like us, for all of us really, because I'd find it hard to believe if most people here didn't grow up in a household where the news was on every night and probably a newspaper was being read every morning, probably didn't have very conscious parents or any conscious environment around them. And that's what breaking generational trauma is, changing that for the next generation. I think there's a big thing that we lack at the moment too, is looking at how we nurture and how we care for our generation coming through right now. And we've got to pass that wisdom on. We've got to do it, because if we don't pass the wisdom on, it's coming out of textbooks. And I think we all know how accurate a textbook is these days too, right?
pretty much.
Mm.
In fact, I showed that diagram before. I'm just got to find it again for you. I want to get your comments on this one
So
because
this
you
is
may
where,
remember we talked. This is the
yeah,
Wilbur. Yes,
yeah.
because what Ken Wilber talks about is that it all depends on how you see what's going on in the world. And what Wilber says and what Graves says and many of the consciousness leaders of the world is what we see as a falling apart is actually a shifting. It's basically a great, that's why you call it the great, was it the East meets
Right
West
away.
shifting, the shift report. It's a huge shift we're in. In fact, Steve McDonald, who we know pretty well, he
Mhm.
says we're in one of the most significant shifts in consciousness, basically in modern history, according to Graves and Wilbur. We're moving into a green, what's called philanthropic, public kind of good kind of consciousness, whereas the Dark Ages was back in the amber. That was when we were in a black or white, God versus evil. This one here
Mate,
was
we're pretty much there in COVID as well too, was I think we fell back a tier there before we've started to move back up again. Black
that's
and white.
exactly what Steve said, though. He said, whenever you look at a great consciousness shift in history, you generally drop back a rung briefly and then you jump up two. So we've been dropping back a rung, but we're getting ready to jump up two, which is basically all about a public focus. In other words, a civil duty, finding a way to actually contribute to society rather than anything else. And I think something that I call it the deathbed philosophy, which Stephen Covey puts very well. Covey, in his book Seven Habits of a Highly Effective People, says that you want to imagine on your deathbed, like what is it that you want at your funeral people saying about you? Like, would you want them to be saying like, oh yeah, nah, he had a really good job, worked as a public servant, made some good money, did what the government told him, kind of did all this and did all that? Or do you want them to be saying, yeah, well, basically he lived his truth and made a difference? And very rarely will anyone ever talk about the money you made, number one. They'll never
Mhm.
talk about the structures that you set up. They'll never talk about all that stuff, which we, of course, you don't ignore that stuff. It's the contribution that you make to the earth and to the world. And
Legacy.
yeah. And speaking from my heart, that's particularly relevant for me because I've had three critical deaths in my life in the last 4 years. I've had my much beloved partner, Sammy, died 4 years ago unexpectedly. I had my father die 12 months ago. I had my mother die 4 months ago. And it's really hard to think of a more significant death, I think, than your mother. I think that hit me harder more than anything else and made me realize that just like that, she's gone. And I'm on the next cabs off the rank in my family now, literally. I'm queuing up for. So I thought very much about what's the legacy, what I'm going to actually leave. What difference can we actually make? And I don't know what difference we can make in Australia, for example, but I certainly want to try. I want to do something. I want to teach what I can because if 79 people or 100 people here today can listen and take some action and do something, I mean, that's a spillover effect. If each person impacted 10 people, we've impacted 1,000 people today. So my question to you, Trent, is what are some practical actions that you think people can take? It's all very well and good to talk this stuff, but what are some practical things? Because I know you've been a really practical guy. That's what I love about you. You don't just talk about this stuff. You got out there and you had Prevent Consultants where you really help people with mental health. You helped me when I had my cannabis brownie incident in Thailand 2 years ago with wisdom that helped me get through a really scary moment for me, which was funny for you and my son, but not funny for me. You help people with that. You've helped a lot of people with the I'm Awakening movement that you're running now. So, what are practical things that you could say to people to help them not be in the private, but still be able to be authentic to their truth and not going to government evil, as an example? Because there's no question the government are overstepping their mark. So, what's the fine line? What are some practical things people can do, but still says we don't like what you're doing, but working in the right space?
Mate, for me, you know that I kind of live on the three pillars of educate, empower, and enlightenment. And I believe that everything starts with education and it starts with the wisdom. A lot of my wisdom has come through mentors, a lot has come through travel as well too. A lot has come through a lot of commitment as well, You know what it's like, Warren, reading books consistently, studying consistently, talking to elders, people with lived experience that have walked it before so you can learn from those people. I think some of the biggest things that people struggle with is knowing how to have self-discipline. One of the first things that I always mention this to you, in the Bible is don't eat the apple from the tree. It's pretty straightforward to me, right? If people had a look on their phone, how much time they spend on that phone, and that's 6 to 8 hours or whatever it might be a day, that's 6 to 8 hours that you can be accruing wisdom. I think it's around about making conscious choices, Warren, very first and foremost. It's about not doing what other people tell you to do. It's about what's doing is true to yourself. A lot of the time people think that, self-care is saying yes to things. Well, self-care is probably more so saying no to things because we fall into those FOMOs. Now you've got all the usual stuff, mate, ensuring that the water you drink is not affecting your pineal gland, ensure the food that you're putting into your gut, you know where it comes from. There's no sprays, there's none of the rest of it. Putting yourself in environments where you're surrounded by people. Now, it's all good and all well. You might have a mate you went to school with and all the rest of it, and it's great. It's a long-term relationship, but does it really fulfill your soul any longer? I think it's around about making sure that you got the right people around you. Pursuing wisdom should be the pursuit of life. I do not believe that accruing money should be the mission. At the end of the day, you're feeding the beast when you do that, right? It's around about accruing wisdom, sharing your wisdom with other people in that sense as well too, exploring it, because at the end of the day, life is quite short. So for me, Warren, in regards to, what are some tips or what are some things for people to do? Well, all the things I said, all your basic stuff. But if you really, really, really want to evolve, then you need to connect with your spirit, work on your spirituality, get connected to yourself, understand those realms, contribute to society. There is no tattooed on my arm for forever, like what goes around comes around. It's not in a sense if you do something good and then something's going to come back for you. It's when you do good, you feel good. It's that simple. And really, why are we here on Earth? We're here to feel things. Earth is a school at the end of the day, right? We're here to feel things. We're here to feel these emotions. There is no greater. And if you want to talk around about what your highest vibration is there, guys, it's not love. A lot of people think it's love. It's quite high. Your highest vibration is authenticity. So I think one of the greatest things that anyone can do is to be authentic to themselves. Don't worry about what social media is telling you, what other people are telling you, what your parents, whatever it may be. It's about being really true to yourself and authentic to yourself. If you can be authentic, you will find that you will have one of the most incredible lives getting around. COVID as an example, I'm going to talk about COVID. Like, mate, I obviously was not vaccinated. I traveled to 6 countries and the rest of it. Why? Because I know who I am. I don't need a piece of paper to go through any which way. I walk in that spirit because that spirit is really that authenticity of what you can do. So I think that, how could people make a positive contribution for themselves and how could they be a part of the change is I think it's important to have a look at what you've got 10,000 hours in. What gifts might you be able to share with other people as well too, right? Because those gifts can turn into things like public foundations where you can educate, you can assist, whatever it might be. That can definitely change your personal circumstances. It can definitely change your tax structuring. It can definitely change your asset protection as well too. There's multiple things you can do, but faith over fear at the end of the day, right? Like it's faith over fear. And you've got to trust yourself as well too. It's really incredible that for myself, Warren, you know this, and probably a majority of people on here do too, that for myself, I'm a big believer in plant medicine, like a huge believer in plant medicine. The reason why I'm a big believer in that is because it will reset your subconscious. That is why I think it's really difficult to move forward. You can't take 2 steps forward until you take 1 step back. So for myself, in regards to, back to your question, what can people do that helps? All those basic things I said, you know, I would encourage people if they've never thought or explored around plant therapies, in particular, Amazonian cactuses and things. I would do some homework, and I'd listen to your heart to feel if that might be something for you. And then I'd find an avenue where you might be able to execute that. But the truth is, guys, everything's changing and you've got to change with it. And it's a matter of which way do you roll with it. All these implementations, I know we're going to talk about this at some stage in the next few weeks, Warren, like digital IDs and all the rest of it. The truth of the matter is, guys, it's here and it's here to stay. Like that's the bottom line to it. So you got to work within what you've got, find your avenues, but find your purpose, within that space. Education, education. Education leads to empowerment. Empowerment leads to enlightenment. Enlightenment leads to true sovereignty, is what it is, was.
There's a very good question here. I was actually about to say to you, Trent, we could take some questions now, and Susan's already got a good question here. She's asked, can you define the public versus private used in the event description? I thought it would have been public or private foundations. What is the public and private in the context of this convo spiritually? It's a good question. I mean, maybe you could talk about public-private foundations or what you mean. It's a good question.
Public-private foundations, guys, you might have heard of things, they call them PMAs or private foundations, where basically what it is that you set yourself up into a structure which sounds good in theory, but does it really work? Well, no, it doesn't really work. And you're basically saying that you're going to choose to operate as a private citizen. So you're excluding yourself from things like taxes, you're choosing not to pay that sort of stuff, and many other things as well too. And then when you go into the public side of those foundations, well, that's more along the lines of that you've got a foundation that contributes to society. So you're not withdrawing yourself. A really good example, just to sit on mental health as an example, guys, is can anyone, does anyone know of any government mental health organization? You won't find one because there isn't one. But what is there? Well, there's a lot of grants that give out to a lot of public foundations, Are You Okay? Black Dog Institute, Beyond Blues, Lifelines, these things. So these people at some stage in their life identified, hey, there's mental health challenges in this country and there's a lack of services. The government's not going to do anything about it. So what we'll do instead is we'll set up our own foundation. We'll let the government know what we're going to do. They'll endorse us. We'll ask them for grants. We'll go to Google. We'll get Google grants. We'll go to the ATO and we'll tell the ATO what we're going to do. And the ATO will turn around and they'll actually say, great, you're contributing to a society. So depending what category that you set yourself up and what, purpose you're delivering for the public, well, then you'll get different tax exemptions. Some of these are complete 100% free tax exemptions as well too, right? So your private really, when you talk about private foundations, is really when you're about yourself and you're deciding to remove yourself from society, from the general public. Public foundations is no, I want to be a part of the difference. I've got something that I might be able to offer, or me and a collective people might have something to offer. We might be able to educate people. We might be able to help mental health. We might, be able to assist in domestic violences as an example. We might be able to assist in permaculture, homeopathy as an example, organic farming. We believe that the foods at Coles are up to shit. So we're going to do our own public foundation and we're going to focus on organic farming. We're going to teach people how to do that own stuff in their own house so they don't need to go to Coles and Woolworths and they can't keep dictating the prices of what people pay. So sort of two kind of polar opposite things there really, Warren. One contributes and one excludes.
I like it. Yeah. So what you're really saying, if I could summarize it, is that the public versus private is often an excuse to kind of avoid contributing or getting involved. And whereas this move to stage 6 consciousness that's happening right now in society is saying everyone's got to pull their weight at some level and ask what their duty is. And believe you me, I mean, I have some fairly facetious jokes, but I will, censor a little bit on this one. But, all of us have our ideal thing that we'd rather be doing in our life. And, if I had my ideal world, I'd just probably be in Bali all the time, drinking my little drinks and riding my motorbike and doing nothing else. But this is, I think, why we've got to where we've got to. One of the reasons I respect Florida so much is that Florida originally was, and I've said this on many webinars, but they were a very good example of this idea that they had but when the mandates first came out with COVID, they actually were pretty bad in Florida, and the churches and then the people pushed back as a fairly massive collective. And the result of that massive collective pushback was after some leaders went to prison. Oh, by the way, some leaders actually were imprisoned simply because they said, look, we're not going to close our churches down just because the government says so. That goes against the scriptures and goes against what we believe in. It goes against the very reason that we've got Bibles at our table and why we've got our rights and freedoms, because there was a time 500 years ago where if you had a Bible in English, this is totally serious. If you had a Bible in English, you could be on the barbecue that night. If you were a herbalist doing plant medicine, you were deep shit. I mean, you would have been heading for the barbecue, Trent, So many of your friends would have been heading for the barbecue. Me having a Bible in my house, I'd be heading for the barbecue, literally burnt at the stake. And why did it stop? Because people pushed back. People got educated. People got involved in society. They spoke out on issues. They encouraged critical thinking. They found ways to address things, And so Florida, that was one of the things why. And so if every single person here, and it can start so simply. I've got a friend right now, I noticed that what she's doing, she's a mother with 4 kids who's devoted herself to finding ways to help families cut their costs while still
Love,
remaining alternative wellness. It's brilliant what she's doing. And she's
love.
showing them ways to save money and get away from Coles and Woolworths and go back to natural and still save money. And I've been like, wow, that's been her contribution. And she's been right out in the public arena doing it.
Mhm. Right. It's interesting. It's, sometimes we don't agree with what some people do in the public realm as well too, because, there's certain people in that elite crew that we know that do things that we might not be aligned with by any means. But I don't know one wealthy person that isn't involved in philanthropy one way or another, Warren, one way or another. Because what happens is
100%.
people think that money is going to be the solution to all their answers. They get their money and they realize that they're probably more miserable when they were before they had the money. So then people look at what really makes us happy, guys. At the end of the day, like let's be real here. We're all just trying to walk each other home at the end of the day, Warren. We're all here for a reason. We're all here to leave the place better. We're not here to be driven by money. We're not here to be driven by fear. We're here to nurture each other, care for each other, create new pathways for each other as well. That's what the whole earthly life experience is all about. It's about to feel these things and to feel these emotions and not to get stuck in those.
Yeah, 100%.
It's an interesting one too, mate. You touched on something a little bit before that's just been playing in the back of my mind for a minute. And, how do we change out there? Well, we change out there by changing in here first. It all starts with ourselves, right? So if anybody here wants to see Australia in a better position, like we all have to, myself included, Warren included, there's always more that we can do, right? And I think that a lot of people get too caught up in this fear of this great reset. Now, we've all got our own perceptions, right? We've all come from our own environments. We've all had our own upbringings. We've all been experienced to different levels of trauma and success and, all these great, all these things. But the truth of the matter is man is trying to play God. That's really the truth of the matter. Now, when you're a man of faith like myself, like it's very easy for me to kind of sleep easy at night because I know that man will never dictate this in any way, shape, or form. It's a consciousness evolution that we're going through, but we all need to evolve with it. And if we don't evolve with it, then we're going to be forced down the bottom because it's free will. Like we all have a choice, right? We all have a choice no matter what it is that we do. Sometimes people say that they don't have a choice, but the truth of the matter is we've all got free will, right? It just may mean that you might not be able to have that type of house that that your ego desires. It might be that you can't have as many holidays or you can't live as many lives or you can't, do certain things that you choose to do. But the truth of the matter is, guys, is that well, we've all got the same ability, right? We've all been made by the Creator and we've all got the same abilities that the Creator does. Similar to when you were talking before, Warren, about how you manifest your things or you speak things into existence. We've all got that because what really is the matrix? It's when we don't have control of our own mindset, when we've been embedded with fear. So then what we do is we see that fear. So yeah, we definitely got to do things that are good, mate. And just to touch back on that public foundation to finish your question, because I know I can ramble a bit on these, but I'm very passionate about this sort of stuff. But, if you're doing something which is for the greater good for people, think about how that makes you feel. Nothing's made me ever feel more better than my love of God, me sharing that, me raising people's consciousness, me inspiring other people through my authentic self. Like nothing brings me more. I don't need a partner. I don't need children. I don't need anything else because I get so fulfilled like that. And if anyone that's been in that space or does that currently, you may even do it through business as well. You might even do it through volunteer work or community. But is there a better feeling than contributing? I don't think so, and that's one of the greatest keys to staying in a high vibration.
100%.
Mhm.
So, any questions that anyone's got before we wind up with concluding comments and actions? Bell writes, speaking in the private doesn't prohibit one from contributing to humanity.
Mm.
No, not at all. I mean, like anything, what we're talking about very much is that you can still contribute to the community, but we're going to have a lot more impact when we getting into the public arena. So what we're more talking about is a private, in a sense, a sovereign citizen. And a lot of it comes down to timing and places. And I remember saying in COVID, and I got a lot of flack at the time, after as people acknowledged, I said there was a time and a place to do protest and the COVID, the way it was done at the time, I said it's just not going to work effectively. There's better ways to push back, you know? And so a lot of it is that. Like, for example, if I was living overseas and I was in the Cook Islands, would I set up a private foundation over there? Absolutely. Cook Islands has a system that allows that kind of stuff. In Australia, the government have made it clear in no uncertain terms. So I'm not saying don't do private. This is where I'll give my comment. Just make sure you understand what you're dealing with. And one of my particular, I think, things that annoys me, so to speak, is when people get up and are doing the private and have a misguided idea. And I say to people, look, there's a price for things that you do. Like, I knew there was a price for me pushing back in COVID, and I won't go into the details, but there was a price I paid. You know, I couldn't just get up and speak out against a government agenda. And everyone I know did have various things to deal with, myself included, which I won't go into details as an example. If you choose to go into private, you can. Just be mindful. The government have made it clear in no uncertain terms that they're going to go after you. They've told that online. They've told you that they don't acknowledge it. But if you believe in it enough to hold your ground, then by all means, go that path. What we're saying here today is the public has got a better chance of bringing change. I mean, imagine if Trump had done Trump as an example. In 2000, I'm sure none of you know, or very few know, and Trump, you may not know this, in 2000, Trump ran for politics in America. He actually ran for president. Did you know that?
In 2000?
Yep.
Yeah, right. No, I wasn't aware of that.
No, most people don't. You know why? Because he tried to do it from a small party. He set up his own little thing and tried to push his agenda. Eventually, he realized that he wasn't going to get anywhere, and he joined the Republican Party. He got into the system, learned to play the game, but he learned to play it on his own terms. And I think that's one of the things that we're not saying that you go and do it. It's more giving you a possibility of something to think about. And for me, we've got a better chance of Australia, for example, of like, imagine if we could get the whole health system changed to acknowledge natural medicine and homeopathy, hypothetically. Imagine if we could do that. I'm not saying it would be easy. I don't even know how possible it is. Is it worth a shot of doing it? You know? However, how cool would that be?
Well,
Absolutely.
it'll happen at some point, It'll happen at some point.
Oh,
Absolutely.
it'll happen. And it won't happen if we sit back and say it'll happen in the future. It happens because right now we get out there and spread the word. I mean, I've been doing it for years, homeopathy, natural medicine, and I tell everyone I can. I helped, I share stuff with my staff and teach them about that. I teach it to my kids. It may take 50 years, but I'm telling you, it's going to come in. There's a question here. What is the Great Reset? Is it a world event or an internal growth process? That's a good question. So, Trent.
Well, the Great Reset is effectively the bottom line is, guys, is that resets happen historically, probably, every 60 to 110 years, there's always a reset, right? If you talk about finance, we went from a barter system, we went into gold, we then went into, your gold coins and the rest of it. We then kind of went into fiat money, then kind of credit came in as well too. So, that's one example. So the system's always changed. So what's happening in the Great Reset is your financial system is changing, the education system is changing. It's very clear that there's a lot of things that none of us, I'm sure, agree with that are in education systems, health systems. People turn, or the narrative being pushed that man-made medicines are better than natural solutions, like what Warren is talking about. So really the Great Reset is going to have to be a massive reset. There's too much debt. It's not possible. They pull money out of thin air and they continue to do this. This is why we've got the cost of living. This is why inflation is the way that it is, because the more you print, the more inflation you get. And we're at the point now where people can't afford to it. I think everybody would agree going to get one grocery basket at the IGA or, one little shopping bag's probably $100 these days, right? So there's going to be a need for a reset, and the reset will be a new system, which will be financial, education, it'll be health, there'll be a bunch of different parameters around it. You most certainly, and there's, for a lot of people that may have just woken up recently, nothing's new. This has been going on for thousands of years. There certainly are people that can pull a few strings that, yes, things would absolutely be within their favor. Most certainly that would be within their favor. So they really are trying to control to see how much more of that they can get into their favor. But I think, again, until people stand up, and when I say stand up, I don't mean stand up and protest and fight it and all the rest of it. I mean more along the lines of stand up and go, no, okay, this isn't okay anymore. I'm not going to go and rage about it, but I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to be a part of this change. I'm going to do a small piece. I'm going to do how that looks. you've also just got to think around about what human behavior is as well too. Unfortunately, the metaverse is whenever you got your eyes in front of a screen, whenever you're on your social medias or whatever it might be, we've got to put those things down. We've got to come back into the real world. We've got to, not got to be so distracted. Everybody gets distracted, and a lot of misinformation gets thrown around in many areas as well too. So yeah, your great reset is a bit of a scenario of that. That potentially you may find that for some people there's a point where they can't, they don't have the ability to be able to look after themselves, so they'll be dependent on others. Is potentially what could happen. We none of us have got the crystal ball either, guys. But the one thing I can tell you, which is outside of man's control, is the Great Awakening is also happening. And what that Great Awakening is that we've all got the ability. Think of it like this. Let me try to think of a good way for you. Think of it like this: what's something that you won't understand? Say like a sale at a store or something. Like the sale's on for 3 days, a 3-day 50% off sale. If you get in there on those 3 days, you're going to get way more value if you're in those 3 days versus those other 362 days, right? That's really where we are at the moment. And it's too short for me to explain it in a couple of minutes now, but as above, so below. So what happens in outer space, not upper, outer space, what happens in outer space affects everything here with us. So to put it quite simply, the stars are aligned at the moment for us to be able to release things that no longer serve us, like habits, like behaviors, like thoughts. And there's an opportunity for us now to acquire a wealth of wisdom. Now, for anybody that understands things like reincarnation cycles and stuff like that, well, then you'd be aware that you're here to live your purpose. And the reason why you've come back is you probably haven't lived your purpose as of yet. So there's an opportunity to clear a lot of karma right now in the Great Awakening, like immense amounts of karma as well too. No better time to release things that no longer serve you and adapt to things that do serve you. And that can be, some of the stuff that Warren does and the rest of it. It might be time to restructure yourself, look at, maybe stop working for somebody, maybe start working for yourself, step into those roles. But yeah, the Great Reset will try and control, effectively, they'll try and have control over where society moves forward, but it won't be for everybody.
No, love it. So, okay, so we're now been going an hour, so I think we should wind this up. Any final comments that you've got? Like what action, because obviously today it's a bit different. Normally in GWC podcasts, we have a call to action, but today we were more just wanting to get started with a series and just share a message. So any final action that people can take from today's webinar, that they can go away, Trent, and do something about?
Mate, if anybody wants to have a look, Warren had just spoke about Steve McDonald earlier around it. It wasn't that long ago, a couple of months ago, I've done a free series with Steve McDonald, which is at the iamawakening.com.au. It's a 3-part series. It's all free. You just put your email in and you'll get it sent out. That'll help you understand, Warren briefly touched on it, I briefly touched on it, but it'll help you understand the 6 tiers of consciousness in stage 1. It will also help you understand those 3 tiers above that as well too. I think for most people, my advice would be to, anything around Claire Graves, anything around about, David Hawkins as well too. Anything about The Religion of Tomorrow by Ken Wilber is another one. I would just encourage people to look into things which is going to advance their consciousness and also advance them spiritually as well too, would be my advice, whatever that looks like to you. If you want a place to start, go to I'm Awakening and watch that 3-part series from there. And I'm sure you'll get plenty of inspiration as to where you might go after that, what you might look for. But raise your consciousness. Bottom line, my advice to everybody, raise.
100%. That's kind of what GWC was about, Trent. That's why we teamed up. It's about, raising your consciousness. That was what we did during COVID, was how we started. And at the same time, part of that is protecting your wealth, because at the end of the day, we have to function in the 3D world. We've got to actually have money to live and eat. We've got, sure, we could go and live in the bush and learn to live off the land, if that's even possible now in Australia with all the regulations. But basically, we need to function in a monetary system. That's the nature of being westernized. And so that's part of it too. But the most important thing is to protect your mindset and protect the way you think and raise your consciousness. So next week, we're going to be talking about the digital ID. Like, what does this mean? Like, how can we rise above it? How do we learn to live within that? So don't miss next week, because we're going to go into that. I think it's a very important topic. In fact, beyond important. I think probably one of the most critical moments in our country's future. It's the point where we've gone from, by and large, still some semblance of freedoms to where potentially the last remaining ones are going to be limited like never before. How do we navigate that? How do we rise above that? How do we even bring change in that? So we're going to cover that next week, and even practical ways to protect your wealth, protect your finances, protect your sovereignty, protect your privacy. So we're going to be covering that next week. Today, of course, if you've got any questions, like Trent's given you things you can look into. If you want to kind of ask questions or, you know, explore things more, you can just email us, support@globalwealthclub.com, or go to our site. We've got plenty of free trainings on our site as well. But yeah, look, thank you for coming, everyone. And thank you, Trent, for sharing your wisdom. Profound and powerful.
You're welcome, mate. Guys, take what you want to take, leave what doesn't serve you. That's simple. I appreciate you, Warren, and thanks for your time.
Beck and Michael just came on and said, "Oh, we missed it. Is it recorded?" Yes, Beck and Michael, it is recorded, and we'll be releasing a full recording in the next 24 hours to all registrants, and a 10-minute highlights reel. So for those of you who are busy, we do release a 10 minutes highlight reel as well for these. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Wazza. See you, mate.
Bye.